becomes 0. When you round off 1, it becomes 0. So there was 0 public participation, mathematically. It's that simple. 200,000 people out of 14 million is 0. A bit like the result I'm about to give you here on account of their compliance with the law. So you have 0%, and these are figures they themselves have given. In the executive summary, they list 10 problems they had with this public participation. They say there was very poor turnout. In one case, I think it was somewhere in KU, 168% people turned out to give their opinion. 68% spirits showed up to give their views in one particular case. And an order was actually issued against this process on that account. They then, in this form, list the allegations against the Deputy President. This is the National Assembly. But then don't give the people what the Deputy President's responses are. And this is not an idle issue I am raising here, because, as I stated, under the Fair Administrative Action Act, Section 5, they must give the public the opportunity to consider all relevant material. All relevant material cannot include the plaint, but not the defense. That was a fundamental dereliction under Article 50 and under the Fair Administrative Action Act. They then say, based on these forms of theirs, that from the entire country, all 50 million of us, they received 8 written memorandum. 8. There are 41 petitioners before you this morning. There are more petitioners here than the number of memorandum they received. 8 of them. 1 per province. Kenya used to have 8 provinces. So again, on average, we got 1 memorandum per province of Kenya. That is what we call insufficient, inadequate, unreasonable, unlawful, unconstitutional. One of the other criteria the court is to look into is, and I think I should point out at this point here again, reasonable opportunity of being heard, which we'll find is one of the criteria. I won't say much about it. Senior counsel has dwelt at length about it. The Senate is informed that the Deputy President is unwell. They even ask senior counsel, it's part of the Hansard, to convey quick recovery to him. It's actually there. They tell him, go tell him to recover quickly. Pray for him. They then say, but while you're praying for him, we will proceed here to hang him as you are praying for him. This is what they did. Now, how are we ever going to face Kenyans? By telling them this is what a fair hearing in Kenya looks like. As we are praying for you, we are slaughtering you here. We are praying for you with one hand, slaughtering you with the left. How are we ever going to face Kenyans and tell them that is the kind of justice we practice in this country? How are we ever going to tell them that is what Article 50 as regards a fair hearing means? One of the other criteria is that did the decision maker omit or fail to take into account a critical issue, or did they omit a condition prescribing the power they are to follow? My good friend, Mr. Dudley here again, has talked about the Senate proceeding to vote without appointing a special committee. The court has enough material on that. But the courts, and I say so with tremendous respect, will also have time to look at what the Supreme Court said as regards this committee. It said, we recommend the committee route as opposed to this lynching. The words lynching came from them there. Mob justice, goon justice. They said, do a committee. You'll have time to look at that. I've said they did not conduct a constitutionally compliant public participation exercise. And as I said, it's required not only by the law, Articles 10, Article 118, Section 5 of the Fair Administrative Action Act. But again, my lords and your ladyship will have time to look at the BAT case, again, the Supreme Court case, that gave the 8 or 10 criteria that are to be looked into in examining whether public participation was properly carried out or not. Among the other criteria that the court is to look into again from the same section 7, is whether the administrator failed to take into account relevant considerations and took its action or made the decision in bad faith. Did they consider everything they ought to have? I have a long list of things here, and I won't spend any narration on them. 1, they did not take into account the Wambora Court of Appeal principles on the threshold test for impeachment. That is where the threshold test was made. They did not take into account the Sonko Supreme Court case principles on the need for a special committee. They did not take into account the BAT Supreme Court case principles on public participation.